This podcast has been brought to you by Voyager's World. We are building the most amazing hospitality network. Please visit our website, join us for free, and start participating.
This is going to be so awesome. I have here Anastasia, and she's one of my most interesting friends in the world. This girl is crazy, and very soon you are going to understand why. So, Anastasia, thank you for being here with us. And I have
Absolutely.
been looking forward to do this podcast for
My pleasure.
yeah, for a while. We met in Miami in 2010 when I was preparing to do my run, and Anastasia helped a lot. Like, we did a lot of sessions of massage therapy, and later we were roommates for a little while, right? I guess 2011 or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
but I remember I lived in your home for for a little bit. Uh, and we ran. Anastasia has been a hasher or used to be. I don't know. Have you been hashing at all?
Not very much lately. Two things. I married someone who's not super into hashing,
Uh-huh.
and I was in a car accident last January, and I have
Uh-huh.
a herniation, so I gotta take it easy.
Okay. All right. But well, it was good while it lasted. It was fun.
Yes, it
So,
was. Yes, it was.
exactly. So Anastasia helped me a lot during that time, and we became friends. And during this period, uh, it was amazing hearing your travel stories, and it was something unusual. And I think that it's very important for people to see through these podcasts that the people that I'm interviewing are badass. They are interesting. They are amazing. But at the same time, they are normal people. Like you don't have a special DNA. You don't have, like you are not a separate species. You are just someone, a normal person that took very elegant decisions. And that when opportunity show up, you went you went down an interesting path. Uh, but I really want to dispel through this series of conversations. I want to dispel that idea that there is anything special about us in ourselves. No. What that is special is the ideas that we took, and there is nothing that we know that other people cannot learn. Um,
Absolutely.
exactly. So please tell us a little bit how that started for you. Uh, you were, I guess, you had a regular education up to a certain point, right? When it became irregular. Let's start from there.
Well, when I was a high school student, I really fell in love with Latin culture and Spanish and everything. So when I had the opportunity at age 16 to go to Mexico for a summer and live with a family, I jumped at the chance.
Mhm.
Something that happened there that I mean, many things happened there that really impacted me, but something that happened there, I was sitting in the cafeteria of the school having lunch, and I realized something. I had one of those moments where you're in a situation, but at the same time, you kind of pull out and see it for what it is from an outsider's view. And I realized I was at the gringo table. I was sitting in Mexico in my exchange program
Mhm.
at a table having lunch with people in English. And that just struck me as, completely not the reason why I was actually there, but I understood it to a certain extent because people, when you're, my Spanish wasn't very good back then. I'm a very outgoing person. It was hard for me to have to struggle with the language and expressing myself. And so when I found people who were like me, I was like, oh my God, let me go, sit there and kind of decompress. But when I had that realization, I was like, you know, I need to be out of my comfort. That's why I did this. And I made a point, from that point on, I really made an effort to go sit with the Mexicans. And I will tell you at the end of the semester, my Spanish had improved probably a lot more than the average person's. And I think it was due in large part to that. So that kind of instilled I always had a love of travel, but that really instilled it in me even more. And as you said, I am a regular person. My parents aren't rich. I, went to a public school, I did go to college, but then what I decided to do after college, I knew I wanted to keep traveling. I mean, I had done a semester abroad in college. I spent a semester in Europe and a little bit of the Middle East, and that was fascinating. But I knew I wanted to do more. And my mother and sister both have PhDs, and they were kind of pushing me to go that route. But I didn't know what I wanted to study to that degree. So I kind of, I guess, horrified them by saying, you know what, guys, I am going to join an airline. And I joined United Airlines. This was in 1997. I joined United Airlines and moved to San Francisco. I chose San Francisco because it was the furthest away and I'd never been there before. And I started working as a flight attendant. Now, the reason this was so great, at least in the time that I did it, was that, okay, let's be honest, the pay is crappy. The hours are crazy. San Francisco is a really expensive city to live in anyway. But what was so great about it was that back then, these companies, the Hotwires, the Travelocity, all these places that basically aggregate unused tickets, like, okay, well, we know that this flight is leaving in 3 days, and so we have 3 unsold seats, so let's just get rid of them at a low price. That technology didn't exist back then, so it was a lot easier to fly standby. I ended up going to, now I'm up to 50, but I think 48 of the countries I got when I was a flight attendant. I was only a flight attendant for 3.5 years, but I did it. And that's not to say that it's not still good today. I would recommend anyone who wants to travel, for free. This is a great way to do it because you're traveling not just during your trips, your work trips, but you're traveling during your days off. But it was easier in the 90s because of what I just mentioned. But it was wonderful. And I actually sat down with the what's the word? I guess like the rule book with the flight attendants, their agreement with the airline. And I went through and I studied it and I realized about legal rest and things like that. So if I had 8 days of availability, I would try to bid a schedule that was like 8 days on, 8 days off. So if they used me on the first of the 8 days for a 5-day trip, there were 3 days remaining where technically I could work, but I couldn't work because 2 of them had to be legal rest and there was no international 1-day trip. So that would magically turn my 8 days off into 11 days off. And so I would just take off. And so it was wonderful.
Anastasia, thank you for changing the location and the light for me. The video looks a little better now. And also we can see our cats, which are also very nice. I see one right now, right behind you. That is,
that's Fonzie.
That's Fonzie. All right.
Fonzie, yeah. 3 of my...
Okay. So you were talking about your education, and where did you grow up? It was in the Midwest, right?
Well, both of my parents are from Minnesota, but my father was in the military, so we actually moved around a lot when I was growing up. I consider myself from Virginia because we were able to live there for 7 consecutive years, which is not at all usual for a military family. So that's mostly where I grew up. And I guess that instilled my love of travel. But at the same time, as the older I get, the more I still love to travel. But I always really like coming back to one, like to have an anchor, to be able to go and see the world, but be able to come back to one place and just have that really be home.
And all right, so you went to college in where, in Spain?
I went to college in it's a private college in Arkansas,
Okay.
but it's actually very international. They have universities all over the world. I went to a semester of one in Greece. When I was in high school was when I was the exchange student in Mexico, and I went to a university there as well, but while I was in high school.
What happened during that time? What was interesting that you saw, or what do you want to
Oof,
tell us?
well, the first thing that comes to mind is living in San Francisco. I had a lot of exposure immediately to a variety of Asian cultures. And something that for me was just amazing, growing up again in the US, mostly on the East Coast in Virginia, especially being in Virginia, there's a lot of history about the US, about the Civil War. Of course, we learn about Europe and a little bit about Mexico and Canada. And then there was just very, very little taught about Asia. It was like, yeah, there was Genghis Khan and a Great Wall. And so I really didn't know what was on that entire side of the world. And first of all, just being in San Francisco and having quite a few friends right off the bat who were of various, Asian descent was really, really neat. But then being able through my travel with the airline and through a funny story I'll say in a second, being able to really travel that region and learn that China is as different from Japan, is as different from Korea as Italy is from Germany, is from England. That was amazing. So I guess one story I'd like to share is that being in a very expensive city and making very, very little money as a flight attendant, I was sharing a house close to the airport with four other flight attendants. However, that sounds like it would be really crowded, but it wasn't because we were all flight attendants. So in any given month, there might be maybe 2 nights where we were all home. Um,
Mhm.
so it worked out pretty well. So one of the girls sharing the house, her name is Susanna, and she was Greek, and her father was a career diplomat. She had actually, Susanna and her father and mother had grown up all over the world. And her father at that time, in 1997, he was Greek's ambassador, not the sub ambassador, not
Mhm.
he had actually worked his way up. He was Greek's ambassador to Japan, and her parents were living in Tokyo. And it was really cool. So her parents were always saying they were really, really fun people. Hey, Susanna, come visit us. Bring a friend. Bring a friend. And our days off coincided. So we checked the loads on the computer and found out that, oh yeah, the flight actually is to Narita, which is near Tokyo, is pretty empty. So we jumped on the flight and went over there for a week. And that was my first time in Asia. And it was really an interesting introduction to Asia because first of all, the Japanese, I love the culture. It's a very, generally speaking, very reserved, very quiet culture. And so I'm experiencing this culture with a bunch of crazy Greek people. I mean, it was a crazy juxtaposition, but it was so much fun. And her parents, having already spent about 2 years in Tokyo, they knew the city very well. They knew the surroundings very well. Her dad, while we were there, took a week of vacation and just they took us around all over the place.
Mhm.
It was wonderful. So that was I don't know. It was a great and very interesting introduction to Japan. I went several times since, but never again with Greek people. But that was wonderful. I
That's
remember he
interesting.
parked his car in front of a fire hydrant, and I was like, you might need to move that. And he was like, diplomatic immunity, my dear, which was very funny. And then I also remember he had a convertible and he left the top down, but this was like when we parked, but this was in Tokyo.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, do you want to, put the top up and he was like, this is Japan. Nobody's going to steal anything. And then I learned just how, I don't know, how ethical and safe Japan is. It's
Yeah.
really was a very neat experience.
No, it's something amazing. But you see, I like to remind people that it's an amazing story. Uh, but until now, it didn't require that you had to be rich You didn't have to be, like super connected. You just use the opportunity that came up, right? So it is a normal person doing amazing things, and I love that in your story, how far you went, and how really impressive stuff you have done with the just the opportunities that you found along the way, and the stuff that you provoked.
Well, I was at a party a number of years ago, and I didn't know too many people there. I was speaking with someone at the party, and we got on the topic of travel. So I was telling them one of my travel stories, and some other person walked by and heard it, and he leans in and he goes, "So, are you a trust fund baby?" And I guess because I had been talking about my second time in Egypt, and
Uh-huh.
anyway, I don't know. I guess he just thought that, and I looked at him and I'm like, no, I was a broke flight attendant. I mean, and
Uh,
I just, yeah, when I was living there, I mean, we were sharing a house. There were five of us sharing a house in a
uh-huh.
very expensive city. And when
Yes.
I traveled, this was before couch surfing, which is a shame because I mean, couch surfing is amazing, but I was staying in youth hostels. Of course, this first trip to Asia, I had the blessing to be able to stay in Susanna's parents' very nice house in Tokyo. But
Uh-huh.
by and large, when I was traveling by myself, I in hostels. I camped out on the beach. I mean, anything to save money. In Venice, I stayed the night in a train station because it's a very expensive city. I mean, I was traveling on like beyond a shoestring, but
You you
I
you
it was
remind
important to me. I made it work.
Yeah, you remind me of one day in California. I I arrived by motorcycle in that basin of the Death Valley, and when I got there, there were a bunch of bikers, and someone looked at my bike, and they were talking to me, and this lady asked, "So how long have you been traveling?" Because I had the license plates from Massachusetts. And I said, "Oh, I have been on the road for about 2 months now, and I'll be traveling another month or so at least." And she said, "But no, so you don't have a job? You don't work?" I said, "No." She said, "Oh, you must be very rich." I said, "Well, I am very rich or very broke." She said, "Which one of it?" I said, "Yes." So yeah, he never took too much money. Actually, there were several times in which I was on the road, and it was sometimes my financial situation was nicer, and other times it was not. Uh, and when I did the run in 2010, 2011, my financial situation was really tight, really tight. Like I was on the road spending much less money than I would spend just being at home in Miami. And in 2012, uh, I did a better even accounting of how much money I was spending traveling in Europe, and it was less than rent would be back in Miami. Yeah, because I was staying at people's homes a lot and camping a lot, and I rarely use any hotel. So as long as you keep the hotels out of the equation, the cost is incredibly low. Um, so what else did you do?
Well, I guess since we were talking about my
Uh-huh.
first experience in Asia, which was great, let me tell you about an experience in Asia that was not so great.
Uh-huh.
Um, this was actually, I believe, this was my last time in Asia. So yeah, we'll bookend it first and last.
Uh-huh.
The last time this was now in the year 2000, towards the end, I think it was probably October 2000. I knew at the beginning of 2001 I was going to leave the airline, and it was time for me to move on. But I was assigned a trip to Beijing, and by this time, this was I believe it was my fourth time in Beijing. Um, I was backtracking a second. I was actually one of the first American uh, crew to go to Beijing. It used to only be open for the routes were only for Chinese airlines. They weren't for U.S. carriers to be able to fly over there, but that changed in '99, I believe. And so, I had been over there several times already with different crews, and it was really fun. I've heard it's changed a lot now, but what I'm talking about is back in the year, 1999 to 2000. So my last trip, I ended up boarding the plane. Of course, it's a 747. I ended up boarding it when the passengers were boarding it because I had forgotten something at ops and I had to run back. And so I was a little late. So I was getting on. And instead of hearing, rapid fire Mandarin, I hear, Órale, qué padre, vamos a China. And I'm like, all this Mexican Spanish and also some Brazilian and some Colombian. And I'm like, am I on the right flight? And it turns out I had been, it was a wonderful coincidence. I was able to be on the same flight to China as a group, a very large group. They were like almost half the passengers of Acer Computer Company. They were the top salespeople of Acer, and they had been awarded this 4-day trip to Beijing. And I mean, it was really cool. Or 4 days in Beijing. I guess it was maybe 6 days altogether. So we're on the flight, and I'm actually doing the announcements in Spanish. So we did English, Mandarin, Spanish, because there were so many of them. And I'm talking with them during the flight. They're all excited, and they're like, hey, you've got to come out with us. I'm like, okay. So, because this crews varied a lot. There were crews that were really fun and wanted to go out. Like the first crew I was in Beijing with was wonderful. And then there was this crew, and they were like, oh, they're being too loud. They're getting drunk. I'm like, they're excited. They're on an all expenses paid trip. Like, chill. Yes. So, long story short, I got their hotel information, and I knew we always stayed at this place called Holiday Inn Lido, and it was a little bit to I believe it was the northeastern part of Beijing, because that was closest to the airport. So I check in, it was a 15-hour flight and I'm working it. So I wake up and they're, I call and they're like, yeah, we're going to leave today for some of the tours. Come with us. So I went, and it was wonderful. We went to the Great Wall. We went to the Ming tombs. We went to the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square. And these are all places I'd seen before. But again, like my experience with the Greeks, it was really cool seeing it with a bunch of Mexicans and South Americans. Here's the kicker. Oh, actually, when we were in Tiananmen Square, the police came up to our group and basically told us we were being too noisy and boisterous and we had to tone it down. So that was interesting. But here's where the story gets not so fun. The last night of their trip, they ended up United Airlines ended up extending my stay. So instead of a 2-day layover, I had a 4-day layover because their trip over there was 4 days, and they needed me as a language qualified flight attendant to translate the flight, the announcements on the flight back home. So that was great for me. I, went out with them and hung out. So the very last night, they're having this huge goodbye party. And, times were good. I guess the computer company was doing well because, man, they spared no expense. They were at a hotel called the Sheraton Great Wall, which was in downtown. And they had Chinese acrobats and fire jugglers and a dragon dance. And the very first caipirinha I had, which you would appreciate that, was actually there. One of the Brazilians mixed it up for me. So first caipirinha, Beijing, China. So this party's going on, and this party's amazing. But unlike them, I have to work the flight back the next day. And I knew I needed a good night's sleep to be able to do that. So, around 10 o'clock, it wasn't even that late because I had to be at the airport early. I was like, guys, it's been great. I'll see you on the flight tomorrow. I have to go back to my hotel. And one of the guys, and yeah, I really don't think he had any ulterior motives. He was being very nice. He was like, it's late. Would you like me to, accompany you back to the hotel, make sure you get there safe? I was like, hey, while he's saying this, there's a whole party going on in the background. And I'm like, look, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Go to the party, have fun. It'll be okay. I'll see you tomorrow at the airport. So he's like, oh, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. So I go out. So normally in Beijing, and again, everything I'm telling you is from about 15 years ago, so it's probably changed, but I had been there enough by that point to know that there were 3 kinds of taxis, and we just called them cheap, medium, and expensive. They all got you from A to B. It was just price per kilometer differed, and it differed according to the age of the car, because obviously the cheap taxis were like the crappy ones, and the newer the expensive taxis were the nice new cars. here's where it freaks me out. I normally, under normal circumstances, I was always looking for the cheap taxi because I just needed to get there and I didn't care how. However, I had the following conversation in my head. Okay, Anastasia, I believe it was a Tuesday night. It's 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. You're in a very large city. Don't go out into the street and get the cheap taxi. Stay at the 5-star hotel that you're having the party at and get one of the expensive taxis who's parked there for safety's sake. I really honestly had this conversation in my head. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, well, in the US, all the taxis, not just any taxi can wait for someone in front of a 5-star hotel. You have to register at, with the hotel or, something. So I assumed in that where I went wrong, that it was over there. So I get there, I walk out to the front and there's several expensive taxis waiting. So I get in one and I had, I don't speak Mandarin beyond a few phrases, but I had a card that they print up with the name of the hotel in Mandarin. So I show it to him and he's like, yeah. And just kind of waves me off and keeps driving or starts driving. So my hotel was a little ways out of the city and I knew this. So, we're leaving Greater Beijing behind and that's fine. And we're going. But I had been there 4 times. I'd stayed at the same hotel 4 times. And I knew which exit was my hotel. And he drove past it. And initially I'm like, oh, okay, notorious in Beijing. I mean, I suppose anywhere, but they were really bad in Beijing about, playing I don't know where it is to try to run up the meter. So at first I was like, I just hit the back of his seat and I was like, hey, I'm not stupid. I know we're supposed to go back there, get off back there. And he was like, yeah. But he didn't slow down. He kept driving. And something important I need to point out here is that I don't know what year it was, but the Chinese government, I guess, saw what was coming. They saw the massive economic growth that was going to take place in their country. So they had the foresight to the biggest highway I've ever seen. And this was before most of China owned cars. They had, 6 lanes, possibly more in one direction. 6 in another direction. This was a massive interstate. And at the time, there were very few cars on the road. Now I hear the traffic is horrible. But point is, it's a weeknight. By now it's like 10:30. There are no cars on the road. And this guy is cruising along at 50, 60 miles. And I realize he is not stopping. He has another destination in mind. And it's not mine. Mm-hmm. And I start to freak out and I can't jump out because he's going too fast. So I start beating the back of his seat, just saying over and over again, like a mantra, let me out, let me out, let me out. He doesn't care. He's driving. And I had seen him earlier talking on his phone and I didn't think anything of it. And now I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? So we're going and going and going and we're really far now. And all of a sudden, he starts to slow down, and I see up ahead on the right-hand side, pulled over, is another car, and there's a man, there's a street light, and there's a man waiting next to the taxi. He's dressed in, when the movie The Matrix came out in the U.S., I had this aversion to it, and then I realized later what it was. It's the same black A-frame trench coat. Uh-huh. And glove that this guy was wearing. And once I figured that out, I was like, oh my God, I'm having flashbacks. So this Matrix guy with gloves and, everything black is waiting next to the car. And my driver flicks his lights and pulls over and starts slowing down. And I'm like, oh my God, he is going to sell me to this man. Mm-hmm. And again, I just have to say there was nobody around. So fight or flight kicks in and I figured I would probably lose a fight. So before the taxi had even stopped, I threw open the back door and just started running on the interstate, just running back, but behind, away from them. And I did not look back. This is where time kind of blurs because I did not look back. I don't know if they came after me. I don't know if they figured, oh, she's too much trouble, but I just kept running and I don't know how far I ran. What I can tell you is that, as soon as I saw this, I knew I was safe. Since it was a massive, 12-lane, whatever, interstate, but not a lot of the population had cars yet. There were bus stops on the side of the interstate periodically. That wouldn't happen in this country because everybody drives, and maybe they're gone now in China because more people have cars. But back then, there were these bus stops periodically on the side of the interstate. I'm hoofing it and I see, and I don't even stop, but I see it. And I was like, Witnesses. There were three, it was a cleaning crew at the bus stop at what was now like 11 o'clock at night, sweeping and, when thing. And they, when I ran by, because I'm sure they're like, what is this crazy white woman doing? I didn't stop, but when I saw them, I knew I was safe because I'm like, with three witnesses, they're not going to come after me. So I just kept running. And eventually I saw headlights coming. And ironically, it was a cheap taxi. And I didn't care what it was. I needed to get in and get out of there. So I wave it down, and I don't know what he thought, because I was in the middle of nowhere. So I jump in the taxi, and all I know is that I had run far enough that when he made a spot to have a U-turn and go back, we didn't pass the guys, or maybe they had left by then, I don't know. But the point is, he took me back to the hotel, my hotel, the right hotel. And I get in there, and I mean, I'm shaking like even now as I retell this story, when I retell it to someone in a lot of detail, I get emotional again. And I go up to the front desk, and I'm like, I need to speak to someone. I was just kidnapped. And they look at me, like, well, what's going on? And so I briefly tell the story. And so the first thing they ask me is, okay, well, yeah, we'll file a report. What's the license number? Well, the license numbers basically of every taxi in Beijing was like Roman or, regular numbers, 1, 2, 3, and then 3 Mandarin characters. So I had no idea what the license plate was, and nothing ever happens. But that is definitely the scariest thing that's ever happened in my life. And that was definitely a downside, certainly a darker side of Asia and my travels there.
It is an impressive story, and I don't know why this keeps coming to my mind, but you were a runner already, right? You used to run.
I was a runner.
Yeah.
I wasn't at, yeah, are you running saved my life? No,
yeah. I'm trying to link one thing with the other. Oh, no, she runs marathons. That saved her life or something like it.
No, well, I'll tell you this. Part of the way that I paid for college, and going back to the whole anybody can travel thing, my parents and I had split the tuition and everything in half, and scholarships came off the top. So I had to work hard to afford college, and especially the semester abroad, because it costs more money. My parents are like, oh, you want to do it? That's fine. It'll be more money for us. It'll be more money for you. So I had worked the entire summer. I had 4 jobs that summer. 2 of them were lifeguarding and 2 of them were waitressing, and at a bunch of different places all over town. I don't know how I kept my schedule straight, but I was on my feet a lot. And that actually really helped, because when I was doing a lot of this traveling, again, trying to save money, I walked a lot. I took public transport when possible, but I did a lot of walking. And the semester that I had in Europe, some of the students were complaining, oh, my feet are sore. And I'm like, oh, you guys are such wimps, because I was conditioned by that time, because I'd worked so hard to get there that, I was able to walk around the whole day and not be tired. So.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yes, I guess. Of course, like, I believe that, being in a cab and being taken away would scare anybody, for sure. No matter what, it would scare a guy. I would run away. I just don't think they would be interested in me, which it's kind of offends me, but. But being as it is, and how was it in Arab countries and in other countries where like the Asians, the culture is very alien to us. We are used to America, and even going to South America or to Europe, I believe there is much more similarity than there is difference. So how was it in the other parts of the world for you?
Well, yeah, bouncing over to Egypt. I go there twice, as I mentioned. My first trip was amazing, but something I discovered very early on is that if I put just a loose scarf over my head and sunglasses, I disappeared, which was great because I was traveling, at least the first part of the trip, I was traveling by myself and, didn't want to draw unwanted attention. And it wasn't my first time in a Muslim country because I had already been to Turkey. And, they're both, Egypt and Turkey are, at least at that time, were fairly secular Muslim countries. So I knew to wear jeans and to wear long sleeves. But just the same, I look very foreign. So, I threw a scarf over my head and glasses, and it was great to kind of go around incognito until I opened my mouth, of course. But something really great about Egypt. When I got to Cairo, I was staying in a youth hostel, and I got into Cairo late in the evening. So I was having breakfast the next morning. And I mean, I literally had just arrived. I had my little Lonely Planet guide with me that I was reading over breakfast, and I was getting ready to go out and, tackle Cairo. And there were two guys having breakfast at the table next to me. And so they, single female traveler, they started talking with me, and they had just arrived to Egypt as well, to Cairo as well. And they said, hey, they were pretty cool. Like, hey, let's go check it out together. I'm like, yeah, great. So one of those guys is an Australian, and it was Y-E, and he's like, it's pronounced Jai. I'm like, Jay? He's like, no, Jai. So anyway, Jai was one guy, and Brian was the other. And shout out to my friend Brian, who I'm sure will be listening to this. Brian is a senior software engineer with Google. Of course, he wasn't at the time, but he and I have become lifelong friends. We met in 1999, and we've taken a lot of trips since then. I even saw him. He came to my wedding, and then when I was in Venice on my honeymoon, he and his girlfriend were in Venice, so we all went out to dinner. But anyways, I am just so thankful that I met him, and Brian and Jay helped make the Cairo trip amazing. Something we did. We had read, it was actually in the Lonely Planet book. It probably isn't anymore, but they basically said, look, it's possible to bribe your way into the pyramids at Giza. Because something I should point out for those people who haven't been there is that the three pyramids of Giza, you always see them, if you look at any picture of them together, always taken from a certain angle. And the reason that you'll never see them really from any other angle is that at the end of like the back of the third pyramid is Cairo slum. It is sprawl. It is urban. Like Giza was a suburb of Cairo, and Cairo has just expanded. And it's crazy because you have these beautiful pyramids, and then you have the slum, 50 yards away.
That reminds me that there is a photographer that he did a major work visiting several famous places around the world and taking photographs from the angles that the tourist authorities don't like. So he put this photo of the pyramids with this slums behind it. Another one that I remember is the Parthenon in Greece, and also surrounded by city. The Colosseum, but not showing with the Colosseum above the camera, instead from the other end. And it was very interesting. It was a photo of the Colosseum surrounded by a traffic jam. So there was traffic jamming every direction, and the Colosseum in the middle. A lot of places like that, and I thought that was interesting. That was an eye opener.
Yeah.
When you visit those countries, it's not going to be exactly like the postcard. It can be awesome, but it cannot be the same. There is even a song in Brazil where they say a song that talks about Rio, and says that this is the city that has open arms in the postcard and closed fists in real life. They say stuff like that. And what you just said about Cairo reminds me of it. And I have a question about Cairo. Did you notice the cats?
I did. They're very thin. I mean, they look like the stylized Egyptian sculptures of cats. They're very thin. They're very long. Long tails, pointy noses. Very, very interesting. Almost
they all point in the same direction.
Yeah, like this. Yeah, exactly. But so we had in the Lonely Planet, it had actually said, like, look, if you want to see the three pyramids without all of the tourists and crowded craziness, which it really, really did get crazy. Put it this way: there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken or a Pizza Hut, or maybe it was both, right across from the main entrance of the pyramids. That was just so wrong. But anyway, it was really to get around all this, you can bribe the guards, and if you're willing to get up early, you can go in and they'll let you kind of walk around. So we were like, oh yeah, that'd be really cool. So the next morning, we had a great first date together. And the next morning, we all got up early. We all pooled a cab and we went to, and they even said, it's the side gate. So we went to this side gate. The guards that night had been drinking, so they were a little belligerent, number one. Number two, Brian is Korean, and they were extremely disrespectful and doing the whole pulling the eyes thing and saying Japanese, Japanese, and Brian he just kind of had enough. He just snapped and started cursing at them and just said screw you guys and left, like just at a really fast walk. And Jay and I mean, it ruined the mood, not Brian, like the guards,
Yes.
what they did. So we were like, yeah, we're done with, we're not giving you money, because $20, I mean, is a lot, and it was they were saying, oh yeah, it's going to be 100, for the Japanese, and it was just very bad. So we left with Brian and we were walking and we were, just blowing off steam. We were just like, trying to get rid of the bad vibes. And it was me who had the idea. We were walking along, and as we were walking, there's a wall to our right, and over that wall is the pyramids, but we're walking through the slums and it's still really dark. The sun hasn't come up yet. And I see sort of at the end of the street where we're heading is a giant trash heap piled up against the wall. So we saw this trash heap and it was pushed against the wall, and it happened to be the wall that was actually the kind of the separation between the park and the slum. So it was my idea. I take full credit for it. I was like, guys, if we climb up that trash heap and scale that wall, we'll be able to go inside the park anyway. And they're like, yeah, I think we could do that. And so Jay started humming the Mission Impossible theme, da, 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 da. And then Brian and I start humming it. So the three of us are humming Mission Impossible, climbing an Egyptian trash heap in a Cairo slum. We get to the top of the wall and it's about a 5-foot drop. And sure enough, we're inside the park. And so then this dog actually began to bark. And we didn't know if it was like, it was a little far away, but we had made some noise when we jumped in, even though we were trying to be quiet. We didn't know if they had guard dogs or anything. So we're all like looking around, because the last thing we want to do is be mauled, But no, we think it was just one of the dogs from the slums. So we started just running, and we found a place where we could crouch kind of in front of the 3 pyramids. And so we all sat there together, just like, wow, can you believe that? Wow, we really did it. And we watched the sunrise over the pyramids. It was really amazing.
That's awesome. And I was checking our notes, and I remember to ask you about moments where people were really super kind to you, because we went through like 2 situations already in which people they were dicks, like these guards and or criminals, like the taxi driver.
Sure.
But most of the time, that's not the reality that we encountered. The reality is that people are really nice, and sometimes they are nice beyond description. And I saw on your on our notes like the situation in Japan, and then in South Korea when you got sick. And can you tell us about some of those?
Sure. Well, the first experience in Japan, this was, not the first trip with the awesome, crazy Greek people. This was a layover that I had, and the longer layovers, the airport is so far from Tokyo that it's actually in a town called Narita, and I had already been to Tokyo, and it was, very expensive to get there again. So I had this long layover. So I decided to explore Narita and see what, one of the smaller towns in Japan was like. And being a very junior flight attendant, a lot of the people they're like, oh, I've been there already. I'm just going to stay in my room and watch TV. I mean, I was just really kind of disappointed by that. I just figured there's always something new to see, no matter how many times you've been to a place. And I certainly wasn't, in it for the crappy pay and the weird hours, or wasn't it for the travel. So I just decided to explore Narita on my own.
And you were not there for the opportunity of watching TV.
Exactly. Oh, and of course they just watch like CNN Asia. It's like, oh, wow. Anyway, So I went walking around Narita, and I got hungry, so I went into a restaurant. And the Japanese culture, I think Asian culture in general and Japanese in particular are very group oriented. America, the West, we're all about, the individual. But in many parts of the world, including the part that I was in at the time, groups are very important. So, I was perfectly happy having dinner by myself. I actually had a travel guide, and I was reading the travel guide while I had dinner. But there was a couple, and they were about my age, and they were sitting 2 tables over, and the restaurant wasn't very busy. So I ordered, again, being a flight attendant and on a really, really tight budget, um, I ordered edamame, and I had never had edamame in my life. And I did not know that when you have edamame, you have to squeeze the little pod, and then the bean comes up, and then you eat the inside. So they bring a little. I was like, "Oh, edamame is cheap. Okay, let me try that." No idea what it was. So they bring this little bowl, and I take one. Did not realize they were watching me. I took one, and I bit into it. And it was awful because you're not supposed to eat the outside. So I was kind of looking around like, oh crap, do I chew this? Like, what do I do? And then the couple, they kind of saw me and waved, and they came over. They were like, is it okay if we come over to your table? I'm like, sure. So they came and they sat down, and they, very respectfully showed me how is the proper way to eat edamame. And they both spoke English. They had both been exchange students in the United States, actually. So we actually ended up having dinner together, and they were able to practice their English with me, and I was able to, learn about a bit more about Japan. And it was very touching to me. That was really nice. And so that was one story. The other story, I have many stories about kindness during my travels. When I was in Korea, it was my second layover in Korea. And these layovers for these longer flights were pretty long. They were usually in like the 50-hour range. So you're looking at 2 entire days plus. And I got really sick. I don't know what it was, but I got very, very sick my second time in Seoul. And I, wanted to go out. In fact, I'm super bummed. I was only in Seoul twice, and I wanted to go. There was a trip to the DMZ and, the demilitarized zone. And I was just in bed. It was bad. So I realized, I need to go probably get some medicine because I need to fly out the next day. And I wanted to make sure that I, was able to work the long flight back to San Francisco. So, after being in bed a long time, I finally got up and kind of stumbled out of the hotel. I didn't know where any of the crew were, or I might have asked someone to go for me, but I knew since I had been there before and we had stayed in the same hotel that there was a pharmacy about a block away around the corner. So I went walking, and I should point out as well that I was extremely jet lagged. So this was probably 3 a.m. I have no idea. It was completely dark out, but Seoul is a very lit up city. So there's neon and lights everywhere. But so I go over to this pharmacy, and it really wasn't until I walked in that I was like, I have no idea how to tell them my symptoms. I have no idea how to tell them that I have a penicillin allergy. I was like, oh my God, I could get a pill that's going to kill me for all I know, or, make it worse instead of make it better. So I kind of walked in and then just had this real, and I was kind of standing there like, whoa, should I turn around or just walk out? And the pharmacist was there. And of course, since it's 3 a.m., I guess it was a 24-hour pharmacy, I was the only customer in the store. He was an older gentleman, and, he spoke no English, and he, beckons me over to the counter. And so we conducted the entire thing in basically like a game of Pictionary. He's asking me what's wrong. And I'm like, I'm throwing up. He kind of points to down below, like, are you having diarrhea? I'm like, yes. And so he goes into the back. He goes into the back. He comes back with 2 different pills. He takes a sheet of paper and a pen and draws clocks. He draws 3 clocks on the sheet of paper. And, it was like, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever. And he puts 2 pills in front of one, 2 pills in front of the other clock, and 2 pills in front. And then he takes another sheet of paper, and he does the same for the other set of pills because it was a different schedule. And he puts, 1 pill or whatever it was. And it was so, because, it couldn't have been easy for, it took time for him to do that, but he genuinely wanted me to feel better. He was a creative problem solver because he figured out a way to tell me how to take the pills in the proper manner. And one of the few phrases that I know in Korean is thank you. So I was just like, 감사합니다, 감사합니다. I was just saying thank you, thank you. But it worked, whatever it was. I have no idea what I took. Must have had penicillin in it because I was fine, and I was able to, after a good couple more hours, I was able to work a flight home. So that was great. And I'll throw one more story in. When I was in Egypt, flying standby, something that you could do as an employee of one airline, and I believe this is still the case, you get reciprocal discounts on other airlines. So United Airlines did not fly to Egypt, but they flew to Frankfurt, Germany, and Lufthansa flew to Egypt. So we would get something called an ID 95, which basically you only pay 5% of the published rate, which is a great deal. But just like our employee travel, it was standby, and we had an even lower boarding priority because we were not employed there, the other airlines. So there was always a risk, but so that was how I was able to get to Egypt. I took United to Frankfurt and to Cairo. And then the second time I was in Egypt, I actually did a little more travel outside of Cairo and Alexandria. And I went to to Sharm el-Sheikh and Dahab and Luxor in the south, but I took Egypt Air. And so I was in Luxor at the airport because I was flying. The plan was to take Egypt Air back to Cairo and then Lufthansa to Frankfurt and basically retrace my steps home. What ended up happening is that Egypt Air, their morning flight, and between Luxor and Cairo, it's, I should look this up, but I want to say it's roughly the distance between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and maybe like a 1 hour flight. It wasn't very long, but one of their planes in the morning had a mechanical, and they had to cancel the flight throughout the day, but all the flights were pretty oversold. So because that one went down, all the other flights were packed. So I was in the airport for 11 hours, just sitting, waiting. Oh, I got bumped off of this flight. Oh, I got bumped off of this flight. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. And there was a night flight to Frankfurt that I had to take from Cairo because otherwise I wasn't going to get home in time to work my next trip. So I was getting a little anxious. So luckily I got one of the last seats on the last flight. So I was thrilled. So I get on, sit down, and of course, start talking with the guy next to me, as a lot of people do on flights. Really nice guy. He had a daughter about my age. We were talking. He was from Cairo, and as we're in the air and we're flying, he says, "So how are you going to get to the international airport?" Because I told him I was going to go to Frankfurt that night, and I go, "What do you mean? How am I going to get to the international airport?" And he's like, no, in Cairo, this is a domestic flight and the domestic airport is here and the international airport is, and I was like, oh, wow. Crap. I had no idea. And I was already cutting it close because of the flight out of Luxor. And I just looked at him and of course, this is the end of my trip. What I didn't tell him is that a couple nights ago, I had spent the night on a lawn chair at a 5-star resort that I couldn't afford to stay in because I was trying to save money and I didn't want to spend the night in a hotel and it was a nice evening. So I was at the end of my money. And I'm, oh my God, how am I going to get a taxi over? And then I had this aversion to taxis because recently of the story in China, yes. A taxi's at night at least. And so he goes, oh, if you like, I'd be happy to take you to the international airport. And I just looked at him and I was like, really? You would do that? And he was like, yeah, it's no problem. And I was like, well, I know you want to get home to your family. He's like, no, don't worry. It's not too far. And God bless him, man. We got off the flight, had our bags, walked through, we get to his car. And I mean, he was just so kind. And he took me to the airport. And I was like, I didn't want to give him money. Like that sounded just seemed tacky. And I didn't have that much of it. But I was like, how can I repay you? And I'll never forget. He looked me in the eye and he said, perform a kind act for a foreigner in your country. And that was amazing.
Yep. That's how people do very often. I had situations like that in which I was helped, and in others in which I help other people, and I say, pass along, do something for someone, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And I have now I believe that we are really wired by evolution to be cool, to be nice. That is the natural behavior of humans, is to be actually very generous and kind. Uh, and one to me, one proof of it, I don't know. I'm not being scientific on this, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That the proof that we are wired to be kind is that nobody gets PTSD from it. You can get PTSD from violence and stress, and bad situations, but nobody gets trauma out of being nice. So that means it's totally compatible with who we are fundamentally. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and talking about being kind, everybody that knows me in person, or at least follows my Facebook, they know that I make fun of religion a lot. To me, it's just simply silly. But I take very seriously and with a lot of respect the things that people do, and a lot of and there are a lot of very good examples that come from or are associated with religion. And one that I like to mention is when you go to Central America, and you go there and you're helping kids, and tell us what it is that you do in those trips.
Sure. Well, not every summer, but I would say most summers since 2003, I have gone to Latin America. We used to go to Honduras a lot, but it got too dangerous. So we've been going to mostly to Nicaragua. We also went to Guatemala and the Dominican Republic. And usually there's a few nurses as well. And we have free health clinics for kids. The only prerequisite that you be in need, and there's certainly a lot of that. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, before I went on the trip, because I don't like providing help with strings attached, like because we are part of a church group, so I
Yes.
didn't want it to be like, oh, we'll give you medical care. Do you attend our church? Do you believe what we believe?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
asked them that before signing up, and they said, no, no, no. We sometimes base out of churches. We sometimes base out of community centers. We also had it in the middle of a field under a tent, makeshift tent. But we just, we partner with churches and we ask them where in your area, and they say, they tell us, and then we go. And so that's really been great. The group that I'm a part of, we are kind of subdivided into three. The first would be the construction crew, which would be while the medical brigade is going on, the construction crew would be helping maybe repair, somebody's home or pour a concrete floor, do some project that needs to be done. Then, of course, there is the medical team, which is the main focus and the main draw for the community. And predominantly, if there's ever like an emergency case, something urgent, they might see an adult, but it's by and large, it's for children. And then, and that's also the pharmacy. And you cannot take for granted, especially in some of these countries where women who are now mothers grew up during times of civil war, which is the case often in Nicaragua. Schooling is not as much a priority as staying alive is. And so there are big problems with literacy. So you cannot, as a pharmacist, hand somebody their jar of, pills and just assume that they can read it to know how to take it. So the very first year we went, I was part of the pharmacy team because I speak Spanish, and I would tell the mothers, because it's written that you can have 2 pills to your child twice a day. The white pills one, and you have them repeat it back to you, so you make sure that they understand it and they're dosing properly.
Wow.
And an additional complication is that they don't have refrigerators, so you can't give them like penicillin or amoxicillin. They have refrigerated. They have to be pills that don't require refrigeration.
I noticed something
But
similar in Amazonia when I went there. That the buses, there was this city that the buses had collars, and which is very unusual. In Brazil, all the buses of the same company will have the same color, and over there they were painting the buses in different colors. Uh, and or they would put like a sign in front of where usually it says the name of the destination. They would paint a color. And I asked, why is that? They said, oh, because here it's in this city, in the suburbs of this place, uh, uh, less than 40% of the people can read. So
Wow.
they may not know how to read the name of their neighborhood, but they know the color of the bus, you know. So they figure out,
Wow.
okay, the yellow one is mine, you know.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, you have to adapt to to how they can take it, and I find it very beautiful. This, religious or not, there are a lot of groups and volunteers and people that do in an individual basis or as a group. They go and they help other people, and
Yeah.
that's always beautiful. They I used to, when I was young, I used to be just kind of disrespectful to that, or at least, maybe I shouldn't say disrespectful, but I was too cynical about all this, too cynical, and I didn't believe that it would make a difference. And maybe it doesn't, but it makes a difference to yourself, and it makes a difference to those people that you meet in person. And
Sure.
there is no way to get uh, 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 a trauma out of it. There is no way to affect badly your own self out of this, and the people that know that you help. Uh, and that is a another faulty logic, but it's a pretty good story that says this: any behavior that, if you extrapolate and you imagine most people doing that, and it promotes, the society or promotes civilization, that behavior should be supported. So imagine this: if most people were charitable, or they just help others, would things in general be better or worse? What is better? Joining the army, or playing folk music, or doing that? I think that one wins. So
Yeah.
so that is a pretty cool, pretty nice behavior, and I like to tell, because I admire that on you as well, and what you do for animals. Tell us about that too. In Miami, you saved a lot of
Oh.
stray animals and all that. Tell us that, please.
Okay. Well, yeah, in here in Miami, I've lived here 14 years, and there is a major, like many large American cities, there is a pet. In Miami, the situation is exacerbated because cats are, I believe the term is photocyclic, which means that when the days are longer, female cats go into heat. But in Miami, we're pretty far south. We're getting a little closer to the equator between as much as it is further north. So kitten season is year round. There's always cats being born. And it's a major problem. And cats are prolific breeders. And I would like to point out that this is not an animal problem. Animals act on instinct. This is a problem that humans have created because we bred these cute little furry creatures to be our companions.
Uh-huh.
And then, when left to their own devices, they're going to make more cute little furry creatures. So, I'm a member of the Cat Network, and we work with a variety of veterinarians, and also now the county animal shelter, which has gotten, thank God, immeasurably better. And we work with the public to provide low cost and sometimes free spays and neuters and vaccines and treatment for the pets. So I have at my house 2 dogs and 4 cats. Yeah, it's a little much, but I love them, and most of them are what I call foster failures. They're animals that were going to be fostered by me. They were going to be, spayed and neutered and then put into the adoption program and found homes. And I have done that for dozens and dozens of cats. But the ones here, like the black and white one behind me on the bed, he ended up losing his paw. His left front paw was amputated, and I felt sorry for him, and he recuperated, and I kept him. And then I have sleeping on the, oh no, he's on the bed behind me, Zach, and Zach was hit by a car and his leg was shattered. He recouped at my house and ended up keeping him. So they all have their stories. But and actually, if I could tie this back around through to Nicaragua, and well, it happened in Nicaragua, but in general, the mission trips to Latin America. So I had talked about the construction group, the medical group, and now I'm actually part of the it's sort of like the entertainment group, because while the kids and their moms are waiting to see the doctors, we work to keep them entertained. So we have puppets, we have games, we have skits, we have snacks, and something that I have done for about the last 10 years is I take, and sanctioned by a veterinarian friend of mine. So it's cool. So I have a bottle of ivermectin, and ivermectin is basically a broad spectrum antibiotic, and it can either be injected or ingested. So it's extremely bitter. Like, it tastes horrible. So what I do is I bring cans of cat food with me, little mini cans, and I look at the animals, and luckily there's a large margin of error in the dosing, but it's basically 1 drop for every 10 pounds of body weight. So I'll kind of guesstimate the weight, and then I'll put, and it's just drops. We have to mix it really well because it really tastes horrible. And then, I give it to them. And so I love doing that, but I never really knew, I knew I wasn't doing harm, but I had never, we don't always go back to the same place. Lifespans of animals over there are pretty short anyway. But one year we went, it was actually a makeshift health clinic that we had. It was so rural. It was in the middle of this field. And there was this puppy. And oh my God, I mean, this puppy, it looked like it in the 80s in Africa and Ethiopia, when you see the famine and you see the little stick kids with the balloon belly. Well, this puppy was basically like that. He has so many parasites. And I was actually almost hesitant to give him the ivermectin, because if you have so many parasites, it can actually create a shock to your system. And if they all die at the same time, then you get sepsis and you can die, or, the host. So anyway, I was, no, it's bad. So I was very hesitant, but I put 1 drop of ivermectin and I mixed it really well, and I gave it to the puppy, and I was like, hope for the best. Back to the same town, and as we're getting off the bus, these kids run up to me and they're saying, "Doctora, doctora," and I'm like, okay, I'm not a doctor. I don't know. Doctors are over there. No, doctora, veterinaria, and I'm like. The vet, and we're bringing behind them this, scrawny but adult and fairly healthy dog. And they were like, this dog was a puppy last year and he was really sick and you gave him the drops, and look. And I was like, oh my God. And there was this dog wagging his tail. So that made my day. That was really great.
That's very cool too. Another funny thing, I remember one day I was taking care of your pets when you were traveling. And I think you sent me an email asking how are the pets doing, and I said, I just counted, they are still 6 pets with 23 legs, 22 of them work well.
Yep.
Something like that. All right. This is awesome, but I like to not just, as I said in the beginning, make people remember that it's common people doing really cool stuff, and that is nothing that we know that they cannot learn. There is nothing, and so much that I also notice that people that are really, really cool and they go out and they travel and do stuff like that, they have a certain attitude that I call it, they have a student attitude. So when they see a situation or someone that knows more, or something that is very different to their reality, they go into student mode, and then they want to learn, and they start asking questions. It's a very common attitude in this world. So I would like to close this podcast with, whatever you want to teach them, whatever you want to to tell people, because we have talked a lot, for the months and years that we know each other. So we could spread out all these little lessons over years, but maybe that is something that you would like to tell our listeners right now, if they are asking you questions like, oh, but how can I do this? Or, or you're so lucky, how can you do it? They still see you and them as different. And I think that is a mistake. I tell people the only mistake you can make is think that you're different than me. We are made of the same building blocks. So anything that you want to tell?
I would just say this: you do not need a lot of money to travel. If you're thinking, oh, but I have a job and it doesn't pay much, that doesn't matter. I would say this: the airline ticket is usually the most expensive part of getting there, but keep in mind, you don't even have to fly. I mean, there are many places to visit in this country, on this continent, that you can get to in a variety of ways. I would say, don't let money be an option now more than ever. You get money on hotels. If you have a skill, I mean, I'm a massage therapist, and I've bartered for different. Oh, my dog's getting up on the bed. Sorry. I've bartered for different things. I've bartered for computer repair. I don't know, any number of things, and so you can use the tools and skills that you have. Just be creative, because the world is a place, and I think it's easy to get caught in a rut. But when you do take the time and make the effort, and it does take both time and effort and money, but you can do it. You can get out there. Anyone can get out there and make it happen. And once you do, you realize that we are much, much more similar than we are different, no matter where you go in the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an amazing message. This is definitely not the only podcast that we are going to do. We barely went through 30% of the list of things we have to talk about.
I have a lot of stories.
Exactly. But the next one will be in Miami. I will go through Miami this year for sure. So we'll do a podcast.
Wonderful. I can't wait to see you.
Yeah, in person, with all the cats and dogs. And Anastasia, you are very inspiring. Okay, and I'm very happy that our paths crossed one day, and
Me
it
too.
became a lasting relationship, and a friendship and admiration. So thank you so much, and I'll be seeing you very soon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We hope you like this podcast as much as we like to produce it. This has been made possible by the efforts of dozens of volunteers, supporters, partners, and visionaries that are helping us build Voyager's World. Please visit our website, join us for free, and start participating.